A very cool new feature of the iPhone 14 Pro Max is the 2x tele that's actually part of the main camera. I've actually talked about this in a couple of my previous videos, but today I'm going to go into more detail about it. What that ultimately means is that we can now zoom in without losing quality because the main sensor is 48 megapixel, and that's really cool. So my wife has me doing chores today, but in between those chores, I'm gonna do some test shooting. Okay, first up, iPhone 14 Pro Max here, shooting on the standard wide lens. This is the 48 megapixel sensor, but the standard 24 millimeter lens. And the first thing I notice is how much shallow depth of field there actually is. I'm about 5 or so feet away on the wide lens, and there is definitely some nice bokeh going on in the trees and stuff in the background. Now I'll switch to the 2x tele. Again, built into the same main camera. So it's basically just cropping in on the sensor. And so here is that shot. And again, there's zero quality loss. You're at the same aperture as well, f1.78. And I think it's a great looking shot. One thing I also noticed is, so here's the 24 again, and we'll put them side by side. So the 24 and the 48 look identical when they're reframed. In other words, they have the same shallow depth of field. So just to be clear, you don't get any more shallow depth of field using the tele. The way to do that is to add a third-party external lens. All right, got the 14 Pro Max here in a beast cage, and I've got a beast handle, and this is a small rig tripod. Links in the description for this gear if you're interested. And right now, of course, I don't have a case for this phone. I'm waiting on a Moment case. At the time of this video, it's not available. And then my other different mounts aren't available either. And so what I'm going to use today, well, what I was going to use is this. This is a mount from Moment. This has really never worked that well, in my opinion, but it really doesn't work well with this new larger camera bump. It just barely fits over there, and I'm afraid I'm gonna scratch my lenses. This is again from Moment. And so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to use a clamp. This is a clamp-on. And this is not a Moment mount because I don't have one for Moment. This is from the guys at ReeFlex. And I am working on a video about ReeFlex and their new lenses. This isn't it. This is about the 48 millimeter 2x tele on the iPhone. These ReeFlex lenses are really solid, but they use a 17 millimeter mount. And so today I'm gonna use their 2x tele. I believe this is 60 millimeter lens equivalent. And then I'm gonna use their anamorphic. And again, I'm gonna clip it on with this mount. Again, I'm not a big fan of these clip mounts, but in this situation, I don't really have a choice. And so this will definitely come in handy for this test. So I'll take it and I'll line it up over the lens. And that's all it is. And now I'll show you the app I'm using. So I'm using ProTake for this test, and it's the only app right now that I know of that actually supports the 2x tele. And so I've got it on the wide. And when you do 2x, it goes in. And so I've got the tele on there, the 60 millimeter. And so when I was in the wide, actually, that's already 2 times. And so now when I hit 2 times, technically it would be 4 times in. All right, so now here we go with the external telephoto. And I just want to be clear, do not judge these shots by the telephoto lenses themselves because the alignment is super tricky. Once I get a case or a cage, we'll be able to definitely find out how they work. Right now, I'm just looking at depth of field and bokeh. And so this is the 24 millimeter wide with the 60 millimeter external lens put on it. And you can instantly see that there is a lot more shallow depth of field. But again, the lens is not perfectly aligned, and so you're getting some strange aberrations. Don't pay attention to that right now. This is just a test. And the DOF is definitely shallower. And so now I've switched in the camera to the 48 millimeter 2x tele, and I have the 60 millimeter external lens. And so in essence, this is a 4x telephoto, maybe 110, 120 millimeter equivalent. And the depth of field is very shallow. As a reminder, here is the 48 millimeter 2x tele with no lens on it. And now here it is side by side with the 60 millimeter external lens attached to the camera. So you get a tighter shot and a lot more shallow depth of field. So now here are some wide and 2x tele shots with the external lens. First shot here is a wide shot in quotes. Again, the lens is on there, so it's actually already a 2x. And then now I switch to the 48 millimeter within the camera, and so this would be a 4x telephoto. And so one more wide versus tele shot here. This time looking at the pool deck. On this wider shot, I am actually focused on the chair, and you can see the background is a little bit soft, which is cool. Then when I switch to the 48mm 2x tele within the camera, again, still with the lens on, the background looks even softer. Now here are a handful of shots just using the 2x tele built in with the external lens. So in essence, 4 times tele. So now we'll check out the Anamorphic. Really like the way these lenses have these front and back cap, very nice. The Anamorphic, it too has a rubber cap on the front, but then the back does have a cap as well, which I don't think other lenses do this. Maybe Moondog does. Again, I'm working on a full review, and so right now I'm just gonna demo these on the 2x tele. So here's the Anamorphic in action and a reminder about the alignment. It looks good in the middle, but the edges are a little funky. Once I get a case or a cage, I will be revisiting this. But this is the 24mm wide with the Anamorphic on it, which would be pretty much the normal way you would shoot. Again, looking at the center of the image, it looks good. There is a little bit of shallow depth of field there, but again, you're using a very wide lens here, and I'm about 5-6 feet away. And now here is the 2x tele using the Anamorphic. And in reality, we're getting more shallow depth of field than it looked like in the original shot, in the wider shot. Because again, we're now cropped in on the 48mm 2x tele, so it's the same sensor. There's no loss of quality, and you're technically getting the same DOF. The lens may play into that some though, but this is really pretty cool because in the past, if you wanted to get a tighter anamorphic shot, you had to manually switch the lens to the tele. Now you can leave it on the wide and just switch it within the camera. Now here are a series of shots using the 24mm wide and the 48mm tele with the Anamorphic. And one thing you'll see here is I wasn't that close to the objects, and so most of these shots, there is very little shallow depth of field. And so with this setup, you do need to be a little bit closer to objects than you do with the telephoto to see that look. Though a few of these shots, like the unicorn float, which by the way, my kids love. And then these roses, the tighter shot of the roses, you are seeing some shallow depth of field. But again, it's so great to now have 2 different looks in camera without having to move your anamorphic lens back and forth. Overall, the new 2x tele is a super convenient way to get tighter shots without losing quality. You also don't lose any stops of light because you're using the same main f1.78 camera sensor. And the biggest reveal to me was that you don't get any additional shallow depth of field unless you add an external lens. That does make sense though, because we're just using the same main 48 megapixel sensor, mixed of course with some Apple software magic. However, that new sensor does create much shallower and natural bokeh compared to any we've had before. And that's on the wide or the tele. Now I can't wait to get the new cases and cages for this phone so I can really put it to work. But first I gotta get back to these chores and wish me luck.